Here's a question most people are too afraid to ask. Why does your light attract so much darkness? Why does walking into a room with your shoulders back, your voice calm, your mind clear, suddenly make others uncomfortable? Why is it that when you stop apologizing for your existence, when you stop hiding your intelligence, your strength, your ambition, when you start choosing truth over approval, purpose over comfort, you don't get applause? You get punished. People withdraw. They side-eye. They whisper. You become too much, too intense. You make others feel unsafe, unseen, unheard. And it's not because you've harmed anyone, but because you refuse to be smaller than you are. Let me tell you something that few will dare say out loud. The weak often despise the strong, not openly, but quietly, deeply, resentfully. They don't come at you with fists. They come at you with guilt, with shame, with false virtue. They tell you to be more humble, when they really mean be less powerful. They tell you to be kind, when they really mean be compliant. They say don't make others uncomfortable, when they really mean don't remind us of what we've refused to become. And this isn't about ego. It's not about superiority. It's about truth. Your fire threatens those who've chosen to live cold. Your strength becomes a mirror, a reflection. And what it reflects is everything they've buried inside themselves. Nietzsche called this dark psychological force ressentiment, the suppressed hatred of the weak masked as morality. It's not just envy. It's not just insecurity. It's the urge to crucify what one cannot become. When virtue is not rewarded, it is because the virtuous man threatens those who are not. You felt this, maybe in your family, when your success drew silence instead of celebration. Maybe in school, when your sharpness made teachers uneasy. Maybe in your workplace, when your excellence was seen as arrogance. Or maybe in relationships, when your self-respect was mistaken for selfishness. But here's the truth Nietzsche knew. They don't hate you. They hate what you represent. You remind them of their cowardice. You remind them of the paths they didn't walk, the words they didn't speak, the battles they didn't fight. You are proof that the cage is not locked, and that realization terrifies them. Because if you can live freely, then so could they. But they didn't. So now, they turn morality into a weapon. They elevate victimhood. They vilify power. And they whisper from the shadows, "How dare you rise when we chose to kneel?" This episode is for those who've had enough of kneeling. This is Nietzsche's revenge. A torch for the unapologetically alive. Stay with me. This might be the most dangerous and liberating truth you ever hear. Welcome to Psychoria. Let's begin. You've felt it. The quiet resistance. The subtle backlash. The way your power draws suspicion instead of support. But what if that resistance isn't personal? What if it's psychological, even civilizational? What if, as Nietzsche revealed, society has been built to break the strong, not by force, but by guilt? This video rips open the veil of false virtue that governs modern life and exposes the dark, buried truth. The weak have created a moral system not to inspire goodness, but to control greatness. In this video, you'll discover why your confidence, success, or authenticity provokes quiet hatred, even from people who claim to support you. How morality has been hijacked, not to elevate, but to shame, shrink, and subdue those who dare to rise. The explosive concept of ressentiment, how envy disguises itself as ethics, and why Nietzsche saw it as the psychological poison of the age. How modern culture glorifies weakness, weaponizes victimhood, and suppresses strength under the guise of compassion and inclusion. Why living unapologetically, without guilt, terrifies people who've built their identity on powerlessness. And most importantly, how to break free. How to recognize these subtle traps in your relationships, your work, and your inner dialogue. And how to rise, untamed. This isn't theory. This is your life. This is your liberation. If you've ever felt punished for your strength, this video won't just explain why. It will arm you with the insight to rise beyond it. Watch to the end. What you learn here, you won't unsee. And once you do, you'll never bow to false virtue again. Today, we're going to confront something most people are too conditioned, too frightened, or too numb to name. The world doesn't want you strong. It wants you obedient. It doesn't care how kind, good, or gifted you are. If you refuse to kneel, you will be seen as a threat. You've felt this, haven't you? The sting of being punished, not for doing wrong, but for doing right too boldly. The rejection that follows when you stop apologizing for your clarity, your talent, your refusal to fit in. The guilt others project onto you when you choose truth over conformity, freedom over comfort. And maybe you've asked yourself, why do people recoil when I speak with certainty? Why does my success stir tension instead of celebration? Why does my strength feel like a crime? Here's the truth that Nietzsche tried to scream into the future, and it landed right here in our time. Everything the state says is a lie, and everything it has stolen. But he wasn't just talking about governments. He was talking about systems of control, morality, culture, institutions, the invisible scaffolding of modern life that teaches you, slowly, to doubt yourself. And behind it all is a psychological virus so subtle, so deeply embedded, most never see it. Nietzsche called it ressentiment. It begins with the weak, those too afraid to act, too passive to create, too resentful to rise. They look upon the strong, the radiant, the sovereign, and rather than admit their envy, they invert the truth. They turn virtue into vice. Power becomes oppression. Confidence becomes arrogance. Truth becomes violence. Masculinity becomes toxicity. Success becomes selfishness. And weakness? That becomes a badge of honor. Suffering becomes sacred. Victimhood becomes moral authority. And anyone who dares to transcend it becomes an enemy of the collective narrative. It's no longer enough to be kind, you must be harmless. It's no longer enough to speak truth, you must speak the accepted truth. It's no longer enough to be yourself, you must make yourself smaller, softer, less threatening to fragile egos. This is how greatness is slowly murdered. Not with bullets, but with shame. Not with cages, but with praise for your silence. And you, if you've felt this tension, are likely someone they fear. Not because you seek to dominate, but because you refuse to be dominated. Because your very existence whispers a dangerous message. You can rise. You don't have to crawl. The chains aren't real. But here's the cost of that truth. They will try to crucify you for it. This is the war we're in. A war not against enemies with weapons, but against systems with smiles. Against ideas dressed as virtues. Against psychological chains dressed as morality. And the first step to liberation is seeing it, naming it, burning it to the ground. That's what we're here to do. And we start with Nietzsche. You were never meant to live small. You weren't born to be agreeable, to be tamed, to dim yourself down until you're digestible to a world that fears people who don't need it. You were born for intensity, for freedom, for power earned through courage, not handed through pity. But somewhere along the way, you were told to feel bad about that. Told to calm down. Told to not make others uncomfortable. Told that your ambition was selfish. Your confidence was toxic. Your truth was offensive. You didn't break the rules. You broke the illusion, and that made you dangerous. What you're about to understand is the beating heart of this entire video. A dark, volatile truth that Nietzsche unearthed like dynamite under the foundations of morality itself. The weak are always masters of the lexicon of virtue. The strong must be made to feel guilty for their strength. This isn't about good and evil. This is about control. Ressentiment is not just envy. It is weaponized envy. It's what happens when those who feel powerless, instead of confronting their own failure, redefine morality to sabotage those who succeed. They don't fight you openly. They fight you subtly, psychologically, culturally, spiritually. It begins as a whisper. She's so full of herself. He thinks he's better than everyone. She's intimidating. He's too ambitious. But behind those whispers is a deeper, more venomous truth. I can't become what they are, so I'll redefine what good means. Ressentiment inverts the moral compass. What was once noble, strength, excellence, clarity, self-ownership, is now marked as dangerous. And what was once cowardice, timidity, mediocrity, self-denial, is now sold as humility, kindness, empathy. This is how society keeps you docile, by cloaking your chains in compassion. They praise your weakness because your weakness doesn't threaten them. They love when you suffer because it makes them feel morally superior. They worship victims because victims don't shake the system, they uphold it. Whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. But what happens when monsters no longer look like tyrants, but like therapists, teachers, influencers, and smiling activists who preach inclusion while secretly resenting your inner fire? You start to second-guess yourself. You start to shrink, to bend, to self-censor. You start to abandon your power, thinking it's the right thing to do. Until one day, you wake up and realize you've become their prisoner. Not in chains, but in self-doubt. That's what Nietzsche warned us about. That's why he shattered the idols of modern morality. He saw what others were too afraid to see, that the moral systems we live under aren't always rooted in truth, they're rooted in revenge. Morality is the herd's revenge on the strong. The masses do not reward greatness. They fear it, because every act of greatness is an indictment of their mediocrity. When you rise, you become a mirror. You reflect everything they could have been, had they chosen courage over comfort, action over excuses, responsibility over resentment. And what does the mirror make them feel? Shame. But instead of transforming that shame into growth, they bury it, they project it, and they label you the problem. They call your fire dangerous, your strength oppressive, your voice too loud, your clarity too harsh, your independence too selfish, all so they can remain morally superior while doing nothing. But this is your awakening. You owe them nothing, not your silence, not your shame, not your submission, because the world doesn't need more guilt-ridden souls pretending to be good. It needs unapologetic warriors of truth, people who are no longer afraid to live at full voltage, people who say, I will not shrink so you feel tall. I will not apologize for what you've chosen to avoid. I will not carry your guilt as my inheritance. That's the essence of this transformation. To reclaim your power is not arrogance, it's honesty. To stand firm in your truth is not violence, it's integrity. To rise without guilt is not selfish, it's liberation. You are not wrong for being strong. You're only dangerous to the ones who've built their comfort around your compliance. So now ask yourself, not with fear, but with fire. What have I abandoned in order to be accepted? What false morality have I swallowed just to stay safe? And what would my life look like if I finally stopped apologizing for who I am? That question isn't just philosophical, it's revolutionary. And your answer begins now. We live in a time where truth feels dangerous, where excellence is threatening, where confidence is mistaken for cruelty, and where the more whole you become, the more the fractured try to tear you down. This is not accidental. This is the age of ressentiment in full bloom. We've replaced the pursuit of greatness with the performance of grievance. We don't honor strength, we shame it. We don't cultivate virtue, we commodify victimhood. Today's culture has flipped Nietzsche's nightmare into our reality. Power is punished. Weakness is worshipped. And moral authority no longer belongs to the wise, the disciplined, or the courageous. It belongs to whoever can claim the most wounds. We've built a system where the loudest pain wins. The more broken your identity, the more leverage you have. Not to rise, but to control, to silence, to moralize, to dictate how others should live, speak, think, and feel, without ever having to evolve yourself. He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster. Nietzsche's warning echoes through every social movement, every ideological crusade, every weaponized hashtag. We are not evolving, we are regressing into a culture that calls self-pity a philosophy and outrage a virtue. You've seen it. You post something true, something raw, something bold, and within seconds, someone is offended. Not because you harmed them, but because your freedom reminded them of their cage. You become the enemy, not because you're wrong, but because you're untouched by their guilt. This is the psychological warfare Nietzsche predicted, and it's everywhere now. In institutions that teach conformity over courage. In media that rewards emotional collapse over intellectual clarity. In friendships where your growth is seen as betrayal. In relationships where your boundaries are labeled abusive. In workplaces where mediocrity is celebrated and excellence is buried under bureaucracy. We are drowning in false virtues. Where to be good means to be harmless. Where to be moral means to be passive. Where to be inclusive means to erase your edges until there's nothing left of you but a muted echo of who you once were. But Nietzsche didn't write for the herd. He wrote for you, the outlier, the one who refuses to bend, the one who knows there is something sacred in your fire, even if the world calls it dangerous. He wrote for those brave enough to become, even if the becoming makes them an enemy of the age. This isn't just philosophy. It's survival. Because in a culture addicted to emotional fragility and moral inversion, your clarity becomes rebellion. Your sovereignty becomes resistance. And your strength, if unashamed, becomes the spark that shatters the lie. Now is the time to stop apologizing for being unbroken. Now is the time to rise. Because if Nietzsche was right, and he was, then your very existence is a revolution. Understanding Nietzsche's warning isn't enough. You have to live it. Because every day, you're walking through a world that subtly trains you to shrink, to betray yourself, to apologize for your own fire. So how do you fight back? Not with anger, but with clarity. Not with noise, but with alignment. Here's how to apply this truth, not as a theory, but as a way of being. 1. Name the guilt and burn it. The first step is psychological warfare. Look at where you've been made to feel guilty for your strength, for speaking directly, for setting boundaries, for not playing small, for choosing self-respect over approval. Every time guilt creeps in, pause and ask, am I actually wrong? Or am I just refusing to bend for someone else's comfort? If the answer is the latter, burn the guilt. It's not yours to carry. 2. Watch for the mask of morality. People rarely say, I'm envious. They say, you're selfish. They say, that's not very kind. They say, you've changed. They moralize because they don't want to confront their own stagnation. When this happens, see it for what it is. Ressentiment, weaponized weakness, guilt disguised as guidance. Smile, don't absorb it. Stay rooted in your values, not their projections. 3. Protect your flame. You don't need to defend your truth to people who have no intention of understanding it. Set boundaries, not to push people away, but to protect your becoming. Ask yourself, daily, what parts of me am I diluting just to be liked? Then stop doing that. There is no virtue in self-erasure. 4. Build a code, not a cage. Don't react to ressentiment by becoming bitter or cruel. That's just another form of submission. Instead, live by a personal code that aligns with your higher self. Speak truth, even when it's unpopular. Honor your instincts. Practice radical responsibility. Seek growth over comfort. Lead yourself first. Don't play by their rules. Write your own. 5. Check your circle. Surround yourself with people who celebrate your strength, not just tolerate it. People who challenge you to rise, not shrink. Let go of those who need you weak in order to feel strong. That's not friendship. That's parasitic dependence dressed as connection. 6. Become unapologetically you every day. Every moment you choose truth over guilt, clarity over confusion, self-respect over submission. You reclaim your life. You become the living embodiment of Nietzsche's highest idea, the Übermensch, the person who rises above the herd, creates new values, and lives with unshakable will. And that begins in micro-decisions. Say no when you mean no. Speak the hard truth. Make the bold move. Walk away from guilt. Stand taller when others try to shrink you. This isn't about becoming heartless. It's about becoming whole. It's about choosing the path of strength, not as domination, but as liberation. Because every day you betray yourself to keep others comfortable, a part of you dies. But every day you stand in your truth, even when it rattles the world, you come alive. By now, you see it clearly. You were never the problem. Your strength, your clarity, your refusal to kneel, these were never sins. They were signals, signs that you were awakening in a world that survives by keeping others asleep. Nietzsche didn't write for the obedient. He didn't write for the comfortably numb. He wrote for you, the one who feels the quiet rage of pretending, the slow death of shrinking, the betrayal of brilliance diluted to appease the mediocre. The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly. And still, you've tried to stay small. You've bitten your tongue. You've made yourself easier to swallow. You've traded truth for acceptance, and you felt the price in your soul. But now you know, the world doesn't shame strength because it's evil. It shames strength because it's free. And nothing terrifies the resentful more than someone who doesn't need their approval to exist. Ressentiment was never about morality. It was about control. And the only antidote, the only cure, is to rise anyway, to walk the edge of discomfort, to defy the gravity of the herd, to reclaim your voice without apology, your truth without compromise, and your destiny without delay. That's not arrogance, that's responsibility. The world is not suffering from too much power. It's suffering from people too afraid to use it rightly. People waiting for permission to become whole. You don't need permission. You need will. Because Nietzsche wasn't just exposing a cultural sickness, he was prescribing a cure. To become who you are. That means facing the guilt they gave you and handing it back. It means burning every false virtue they sold you and building your own values from ash. It means walking the path of highest resistance, not because it's easy, but because it's yours. This isn't theory. This is a call. A call to the fire within you that's been buried under politeness, under fear, under centuries of domestication disguised as decency. You are not here to play small. You are not here to echo the herd. You are here to build a life that requires courage to live. Because in a world of whispering resentment and polished obedience, the most radical act is to stand in your full power, unbroken, unashamed, and unbending. So the final question is not, will they accept me? The real question is, am I finally ready to stop abandoning myself? Let the answer echo not just in your thoughts, but in your actions. Every decision from here on is either obedience to their fear or allegiance to your becoming. Choose, and become the fire they feared all along. If something in these words set your chest alight, if you felt that ancient spark clawing back to life, it isn't chance. It's the part of you they buried, breaking the surface. This is Psycoria. We do not seek comfort. We seek the naked, unvarnished truth. We do not worship pain. We forge it into transcendence. Subscribe, share this, speak in the comments. When were you punished for your strength? This isn't content. It's a revolt of the soul, and it's calling for you now. Until next time, stay unbroken.